Chapter 10 of Tractate Sanhedrin completes the discussion on the laws of capital punishment. The first Mishnah says, "The following are transgressions that were punished with execution via strangulation. Somebody who strikes their father or mother, somebody who kidnaps a Jewish person, a sage who refuses to accept the ruling of the court, a false prophet, somebody who prophesies in the name of a false god, somebody who commits adultery, people who testify falsely that a Kohen woman committed adultery, and the man who committed adultery with a Kohen woman." The Gemara provides scriptural sources for these punishments, being via strangulation. It also provides sources that liability here for striking one's parents is only if they create a wound. Due to the severity of the sin, many sages wouldn't even allow their sons to remove a splinter from them, and similar as it could unintentionally result in this transgression. This is unlike removing a thorn from the skin on Shabbos, where it is allowed, as that wouldn't even cause liability if it was done intentionally, as it's not needed for its defined purpose, which this opinion holds you'd be exempt for. It debates whether a son can be appointed by a court to administer lashes to his father. It debates it from a number of discussions, and cites a source which says there's no liability for cursing or striking a condemned man. However, a son is liable for cursing his father even after his father's passing, so this wouldn't count. Rather, it's held that a court is not allowed to appoint a son to punish his father through striking or cursing, unless the father had committed the unique transgression of instigating others towards idolatry, in which case the son can fulfill this position. New Mishnah. Somebody who strikes his father and mother is only liable if he wounds them. There's liability for cursing one's parents after their passing, but not for striking. The Gemara cites sources. Additionally, this opinion holds there's no liability for cursing or striking particularly sinful parents. Based on a verse, this is debated. New Mishnah. The liability for kidnapping a Jewish person applies if he takes the man into his possession. Others say there's only liability if he also makes use of him. There's debate if there's liability for kidnapping one's own son or for kidnapping a half-slave. The Gemara says the debate if the kidnapped individual needs to be worked or not is if the kidnapper is liable for execution. If somebody kidnaps a sleeping person or kidnaps a pregnant woman, but specifically for the baby and made use of them by leaning on them or something, it's unresolved if this is considered to be a normal manner of usage. It brings further sources. There's no liability of execution if the kidnapper didn't sell the victim, or if he sold him but kept him in his domain, or if he sold the man to his father or brother, or if he kidnapped a slave. Others debate these points. It explains the sources of the dispute on whether a person is liable for kidnapping his son or a half-slave. Additionally, the verse within the Ten Commandments saying, "Do not steal," actually refers specifically to kidnapping. The liability of execution applies if the kidnapped individual was sold into slavery. If one set of witnesses testify to the kidnapping and one set testifies to the sale into slavery, and they're both proven to be lying, some say the witnesses are punished with execution, others say not, as it was 2 half-testimonies which would have been insufficient. Regarding a Ben Sira Umaira, a rebellious son, as discussed a few chapters ago, the set of witnesses towards the second time he commits the violation are considered to be testifying on a complete matter, so if they're proven false, it's agreed that they would be executed. The difference between cases is disputed. If witnesses just testify towards sale of the kidnapped man and are then discredited, they would not be executed, as the man could have pleaded that he was just selling his slave, for instance. Others say it wasn't viable anyways, as it was just a half testimony. This would apply even if the witnesses to the kidnapping signal to the witnesses to the sale that they would testify. That would still hold no legal significance. New Mishnah. A sage who refuses to listen to the ruling of the court also receives this capital punishment. There were 3 courts in Jerusalem, one by the Temple Mount, one by the Temple Courtyard, and one within the actual temple. If a sage argued his opinion before the Temple Mount court and he's rejected, he goes up to the court by the Temple Courtyard and argues his opinion. And if that doesn't work, he goes to the high court within the temple. And if they reject that and he goes home and teaches like his incorrect opinion, he's not liable. But if he instructed people to act like his opinion, he would be liable for execution in such a situation. If this was just a student that did this, he would not be liable. The Gemara cites scriptural sources for this principle. It debates which laws that the sage is incorrectly teaching that this applies to. Some say only a violation which is punished with the penalty of kares, divine punishment, if done intentionally. Others say it applies to laws written in scripture and expounded on by the sages. Others say it even applies to laws made by inference. It brings sources, and it debates this by a number of particular cases. These points are all discussed further. It also explains how the courts and judges would distribute ruling back in those days from the greater Sanhedrin and down to the smaller courts, as there was very little debate on rulings, at least up until the times of the schools of Hillel and Shammai, who dispute on many laws all throughout the Gemara. The remaining points are qualified. New Mishnah. Regarding the law of a rebellious sage, the laws that are stated in the Torah and expounded on by the sages are held stricter. For instance, if a sage says that there is no commandment of tefillin which directly contradicts a statement of the Torah, he would not be liable here. If he said that there are 5 compartments in the tefillin instead of 4, contradicting the teachings, he would be liable. The Gemara clarifies that this liability only applies if it's such a teaching that he adds to and thereby disqualifies the commandment. The only thing that really meets this criteria is tefillin. It explains why this wouldn't apply by other obligations like lulav or mezuzah. New Mishnah. The rebellious sage is brought to the high court in Jerusalem where he's guarded until the holiday, and they execute him then. As the verse states, it must be heard by the entire nation. Others say he's executed immediately, and they just send out messengers. The Gemara discusses this and lists other transgressions that the execution is publicized: instigation towards idolatry, a wayward and rebellious son, a rebellious sage, as discussed, and false witnesses. It brings sources. New Mishnah. A false prophet is one who prophesies about things he never actually heard, or something said to a different prophet, but not to him. He's executed by the court. A prophet who refuses to give over his prophecy, and somebody who ignored the words of a prophecy, and a prophet who transgressed his own words are all liable for death from heaven. The court's execution applies if somebody prophesies in the name of an idol, even if it's true. Somebody who cohabits with a married woman after she's entered her husband's domain, even if she hadn't cohabited with her husband yet, the adulterer is subject to strangulation. The false witnesses of a Cohen woman who did adultery, including the person who did the adultery here, are liable for strangulation, as typically a false witness gets punished with whatever punishment he testified about to try and give. Besides, for here, where the adulterous woman would have gotten burning, and here the false witness instead gets strangulation. The Gemara cites scriptural sources for all of this. It cites many verses giving instances of these concepts of false prophecy, for instance, prophesying for an idol, like the prophets of Baal, and refusing to prophesize like Yonah and others. It expounds on further verses regarding Abraham and his trial to offer up his son Yitzchak. It said that the Satan came up to him and tried to dissuade him, but Abraham refused to bring sources for the remaining points, and these are all discussed further. And that's the end of chapter 10.